the name of our show.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Large Glass. My name's Todd.
I'm Terri.
And this is our weekly show where we bring you an artist live from their studio to talk to. How's it going, everybody? Nice to see you. Hi.
Hi.
I get the feeling I'm forgetting something tonight, and that probably is due to the fact that I've had a cold, and my whole head is just like a fuzzball.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there've been a lot of things happening too.
Oh, there's Glenn LaVere too.
Hello.
Marcellus is here. How's it going? It's 63 is here.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
People
Nice to see all of you. We had a lot going on this week, we had a lot of fun stuff happen this week. Even if the rest of the world is, burning and our nation is, sort of dying. We should go into that, but we won't.
Yeah.
Feel free to talk about that in the chat, though, and we'll comment. There's John Park.
Hey there.
What did we do this week?
We did a lot because everything's happening. So on the 25th, Art Yard had their hatch, which was this fantastic event in which we all hatched out of an egg. We were wearing sculptural costumes that looked like birds. And I would say there were probably at least 60-ish participants or so.
I would say there was more than that. Participant-wise, probably 60 or 70 participants, but there were hundreds of people there.
They had a brass band that led the procession, and then a lot of the puppets and people walking around. There was all kinds of articulation with the joints and handmade costumes. It was just really fantastic.
So a little bit about the Hatch Festival really quickly, because it just sounds like Terry's like, wow, what? You hatched out of an egg? What does that even mean? What that means is the Art Yard located in Frenchtown, New Jersey, pays tribute to one of the large hatcheries that actually used to be in the town by hosting an event around the community where they celebrate that.
Yes.
And so everyone dresses like some form of bird, and they have this 14-foot tall sculptural egg that everyone bursts out of. And there are performances, and it's really quite good. If you want to go over to their website and check that out, actually, you can hit up artyard.org and see what's going on over there. They are... I'm not sure how much longer the Bread and Puppet Theater show is on for.
Ecstatic Decrepitude. I think that's going till the end of the month, but that's also a fantastic show featured throughout the gallery. So must see.
Yeah, definitely. 63 is here. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. He says they should do fish as well.
They should.
You mean like shad?
That's Lambert Bill's gig.
Possibly. Hi, Carolyn and Alex. Nice to see both of you. Hi, Shirley. Hi, Jess Park.
Hello.
Hey, Ben Hagenbush.
Hello.
The whole crew is here. Where's my mother? My mother's not saying hello. That's weird. Mom, where are you? Just kidding. What else did we do?
Yeah, well, also there's a local place in Highbridge, New Jersey called Scouts. They did a story slam. It's based off of The Moth, if anybody has ever watched that. It's all stories with a theme, and there was some public speaking. I know I got up to perform. And they're going to do it at the end of every month, every last Friday. So this past month was Over the Rainbow, Stories About Liberation. Next month is roller coasters.
Yeah,
so
kind of good.
Yeah.
Kind of good. A lot of good stories going on there. Pumpkin Audrey is here. Susan Sparks Michael is here. By the way, Susan, great work lately. I love what you're posting on Facebook. Your pieces are fantastic. And there's my mother. Good. The Moth is awesome. The Moth is awesome.
The Moth is awesome. Yes.
Okay.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Do we have a pin winner this week?
I don't know.
You're unsure about this.
If you haven't looked at the name the artist, go ahead and just take a little peek and see if anybody can correctly guess the artist.
Well, there was a guess at the artist, but there was a slight typo in the guess. Now, I don't think we have to be so technical.
I guess we don't, but yeah, it wasn't as fun as last week. Last week there was a lot of participation. This week not so much, but that's okay. I know it's a busy time of year.
Okay, so drinks tonight?
Drinks tonight.
What are we having?
We are having a beer.
You are having a beer.
I sure am. And you're going to be drinking some water?
Well, okay, so I have a cold, and it's just, it's mostly a cough. And so I thought I'd have a hot toddy with some nice lemon and honey.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
And then,
idea.
but you're gonna have an IPA because
Yes.
Jen is loving the IPA.
I
So
love
we
an
have
IPA
the
too.
Two Hearted Ale American IPA tonight for you, which I will pour off here for you. And I'm gonna make
You are gonna make a
I'm gonna
hot
make a hot toddy. I just need to borrow this object. Can you just pull the plug out of that for
I
me?
sure can.
I'm totally not properly prepared here, but I'm gonna make a hot toddy. So should we go over to cocktail cam
Let's
real
go over to
quick?
cocktail can.
All right. So, oh my God, here we go. So I'm gonna just grab some hot water. Which, by the way, if you ever, I know it's hard to hear me because my mic is over there. Okay, a little Sazerac. I don't recommend hot toddies when you're sick if you're on medication, because that can be seriously problematic. All right, a little lemon. Also, if any of my friends that are beekeepers are watching, they're going to be really pissed that I'm using this thing of honey, as they should be. All right, a little cinnamon stick. Beautiful.
That looks beautiful.
Now, the one thing I was going to say is if you ever pour hot water into a glass like this, always put a spoon in, and the spoon absorbs the initial shock of the heat and prevents the glass from shattering. All right.
That would really ruin your drink.
And your glass.
And your glass.
Episode 96.
96.
Cheers, everybody. Let us know what you're drinking in the chat. I'm hoping this takes away my cough. Cheers, Jen. We see Jen over there in the green room waiting to come on. Oh, what's in the... Is that... Oh, I can't hear... don't worry, I can't hear you. But I like that mug.
Oh, is that yours?
Is that your image? She's
think
cutting the
that's
tail off of a
No.
goldfish.
Oh. You can tell us about that in a few moments.
I gotta hear that. Oh, Mike Rader is here.
Hey, Mike.
Congrats on 96. Thank you.
Thank you,
Rye.
thank
Yeah.
you.
63 is like rye.
63 had a spicy peach whiskey last night. Way amazing.
Oh, nice.
Very nice.
Huh.
Carolyn likes the Whittemore sign in the corner.
Huh. Cool. Who's an RVCC teaching alum? 63. You said that she's at RV. Is that? All right, we're waiting for the answer on that one. Anyway, this is quite good.
He said Jen.
Oh, yeah, no, I knew that. I thought he was talking about somebody in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We need to start thinking about getting into our artists. But before we do, you know what I'm going to ask for. I'm going to ask for your support because we want to keep this channel going. Now, I don't want to sit here and sound like NPR where, you know, we interrupt everything we're doing every 6 or 7 minutes to tell you that we need your support. But it'd be really nice to have your support. Now, how does that support work? Like, what does it look like? Well, number one, numbers. Follow us. If you're here over on YouTube or on Facebook or Twitter or Twitch, wherever it is that you're watching us from, give us a follow. That would actually really help. We'd love that. And so that's the first thing. Second thing is spread the word. Bring a friend next time. Tell them about the show. That's certainly important. The third thing is you could sub. You could sub on Twitch, which is a monthly thing. If you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, which many, many, many people are, did you know that you can give us a portion of that? You take it away from Amazon and you give it to us. The way you do that is you go over to Twitch and you subscribe utilizing your Prime membership. You will see instructions there on how to do that. The only catch with the Prime sub is it only happens for 1 month, and then the next month you have to sign up for it again. But it's like taking a little bit away from Bezos and his rocket ship and putting it towards us so we can continue to make this show. So that would be very nice, and thank you very much for that. Yes.
Okay. People are still telling us what they're drinking. Michael Tong, IPA here, and Mike Rader says they're drinking beers over there.
Yes, so that's good. And 63 says, hey, I ordered a pin and haven't got it yet. Can we check on that? Thanks.
Yeah. Maybe we'll meet you for a drink or something.
I know you ordered the pin, Bill, and it's
Yes,
coming.
yes.
We have not put it in the mail yet,
Yes.
but
We've been very bad about that,
we
I'm
were
sorry.
about to put it in the mail, and I thought, you know what, maybe we could get together.
Yeah.
But if I will stick it in the mail tomorrow if that's.
I'd recommend the High Rail Brewing Company, but a car went through that last week, so we'll have to find another place. Okay, so a couple more things. We're having
John says we're having to drink the last word.
Ooh, very nice. Huh. All right. Okay. Well, let's get to tonight's artist.
Marcella says, "Ooh, B pin soon." Yes. Okay.
Yes,
Can we just before we introduce Jen, because we're about to do that, can we just set a goal for the B pin? Because Mars is correct. We need to make this happen.
100th episode is coming up in a couple of weeks. Let's have the B pin.
Agreed.
All right.
All right. The B pin will be on its way for the 100th episode. Mm-hmm. I've got a month. Okay. Let's talk about Jen.
All right, Jen. Tonight's guest joins us from her Manhattan studio. Jen Mazza is an artist who has works represented in permanent collections of the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum at Michigan State University. She is shown both nationally and internationally in solo and group exhibits and has received several notable awards, including residencies at Yaddo, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Blue Mountain Center, and the Gentile Foundation. Mazza was also granted a Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation Creative Fellowship to attend the Malay colony in 2004 and returned again in 2013. In both 2001 and 2008, she received individual artist fellowships for the arts, and for the New Jersey State Council for the Arts. And in 2008, she was selected to be Artist in Residence at the Newark Museum. Her education includes a BA in Visual Art and Spanish Literature from Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and she also has an MFA from Mason Gross School of the Arts in New Brunswick, New Jersey, part of Rutgers University.
Been there.
She's represented by Tibor Denage, which I love to say. For all of you joining us tonight, please give a warm welcome to Jen Mazza.
Hiya, Jen. How's it going?
It's good. How are you guys?
We're doing great. Thanks for coming on the show. We're excited to have. It's nice to see you. Yeah. So, Terri usually kicks us off, as usual.
I do. So we usually start really general. I always feel like I put artists on the spot with this question too, because it's hard to find a place to start. But can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do with your art?
So I am a representational painter. So I paint things that look like things. And that whole process of looking is very important. I'm a close looker. And I'm also really interested in the materiality of paint and materiality in general in life, which I think all of us, having had such a virtual life for the last couple of years, can really appreciate, especially now. But I'm also kind of very conceptual in my process. So that's, kind of sums it up, I think, a little bit.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'm actually looking forward to getting into that a little bit. Now, just for those of you who are in the chat here, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on Twitch and Facebook for that matter, if you have a question for Jen or a comment about the work, please put it in the chat and we will get to it eventually. We might not hit it right away, but we will get around to it. But we encourage you to ask questions and sort of be part of the conversation. By the way, Bill Mackholt is very excited you're here. He's giving you a cheer in the chat. So, by the way, what's going on with the mug? But you showed me the mug when we were. That is fantastic.
It is. I'm forgetting the artist. I'm plugging him now. Toilet Paper is the sort of company that produces his work. Italian artist who I'm spacing out on.
Oh, okay. If you remember, even tomorrow, if you remember, send me a link for it, and I'll.
I definitely will.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so let's start out. This is a fairly new piece of yours that we're looking at here on the screen right now. And we thought this was a good place to start because, it's recent. It's something that, maybe could lead us backwards through the work. But A Form, the Tyrant is the name of this. But can we just talk about this a little bit? You want to tell us what's going on here? And then I'm going to ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, thank you. This I feel like this piece has a big story to it. So I'm going to give you bits of the story. It started when my friend Jess Laser, who's a poet, sent me a poem by Alice Notley. which is an excerpt from a longer book called The Descent of Alette. And in this particular poem, it is a sort of story about a woman. It's a kind of feminist epic, basically. A woman sort of descending into the subways of New York and trying to escape a tyrant. And if you read it, it's kind of very, it was very kind of, at the moment she sent us, it made sense according to this political moment. So this idea of, kind of having this overwhelming figure that you're fighting, but while she's in the subway, she comes across a painter, and the painter is like, I don't know what to make. I don't know what to paint. I feel like all the forms have been invented by him, the tyrant. And what's characteristic of this particular poem is that there are these punctuation marks, these quotation marks, sort of holding every sort of, I'm trying to remember the exact name in poetry, but I can't. But every kind of little phrase is actually held by a set of quotation marks.
Yeah, and I have a question about that. But before I ask that, David Dean over on YouTube is reminding us the artist is Maurizio Catalan.
Thank you, David Dean.
Yeah, thanks, David Dean. Okay, so what I love about this piece, and for those of you that are looking at this, in terms of a painting, like this is a fairly large painting, but on our screen, it might be really hard for a viewer to kind of understand what's happening in this. And so if you look between the lines at the image as it sort of exists behind what's been removed, you can see a setting of a table and chairs that sort of lives underneath, for lack of a better word, that sort of lattice work of the form where the writing would live. It almost feels like the imagery is the redacted part of the poetry in some weird way. So.
Yeah, and it is quite literally redacted because the entire painting is there underneath. I didn't kind of paint the spaces in between, but actually covered up. I remember at some point someone came in and they're like, "Don't cover it up," and I'm like, "I'm sorry, it's going." So the entire painting is actually of the room is there, and I remember I spent an amazing amount of time on like a little section that got totally covered. And then this white paint comes on top where the sort of page was, leaving the space of the redacted text open as this kind of windows into the space.
So then the only thing that exists from a textual standpoint would be the quotation marks at this point, correct?
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting. And you wrote or I don't know if you wrote something, but I read something of yours. I want to just read really quickly. That happens to be on the bio of you on the Tibordinage website. And it says, in constructing a painting, I look for ways that objects, images, and marks can be combined to form conjunctions and disjunctions, to build a painting which is conceptually in motion, in the process of becoming meaning, becoming meaningful. And I really love the way that statement and this painting sort of have that life together.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I think that's a kind of interesting combination. Also because it sort of speaks a little bit, the whole idea of becoming is, in general, sort of the process that I work with is something that I allow change in. So I'm even responding to kind of what's there along the way and making choices to remove things or redact them or kind of close them off. And so the meaning actually evolves sort of in the process, which unfortunately you guys can't see because you get sort of just the final version.
Right, right. Can we go on to some other ones?
We can. I just wanted to mention too, it's interesting just how it pertains to the other paintings within this particular series, because this is just a component of a series that's entitled Attending to Particulars. And in it, it's interesting to see the relationship it has with some of the other paintings, which kind of adds to its meaning a little bit. Like I had to spend a lot of time with this particular painting because I actually did not see the underlying image at first. I'm just like looking at it and it seemed more design, the design elements popped out and I could see the quotation marks, but I couldn't see the table or the empty chairs or anything like that in the beginning. I was just looking at the negative spaces and the black and white and that monochrome happening. It was interesting because the way that the attending to the particulars title went, I started thinking about, roles and, there's this empty table and what happens at a table. We have conversation and you think of hosting and that whole role of domesticity with women and such like that. And then some of your other pieces kind of reminded me of that too, which we're about to go to as well, because you did a series of Etruscan mirrors. And that also harkened to these roles of identity and attending to yourself and things like that.
Yeah,
So.
no, and there's actually a couple other points I want to jump onto because I love what you just said. Mike Rader is here though, Jen, and he asks, he's like, do you see a difference between redaction and editing? Great painting, by the way, he says.
I feel like redaction has a kind of different sort of agency to it. Like editing always feels like productive, whereas redaction has a kind of aspect of the destructive, of something that isn't necessarily bad being removed from view.
Yeah, but there's something about the idea in redaction. Like when I see redaction, I think of it less as editing and more as a kind of censorship in a strange kind of way. It's like it's there because I'm not supposed to see what's underneath, not it's there because without what was under there, it's better.
Yeah.
So let's look at some of the. What's that?
Good question. I just wanted to say it was kind of a good question, but also a really good point that actually redaction might actually remove the good stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which, and maybe by good, and that's also curious because by good stuff, did some of the elements that allowed a viewer like Terri to immediately see what was going on become hampered to some degree. But it kind of holds back the image for a little bit.
Does.
It's almost like a slow reveal.
It was hard for me to see it in the beginning, and then once I saw it, I was like, wow, what's happening? And then there's like all this conversation happening too. So anyway.
Let's take a look at the Etruscan mirrors, which, by the way, just so our viewers know, I mean, these are paintings, right? These are oil on canvas. They're like 39 by 28 inches. And how did you come into working with these images?
Good question. It's kind of somewhat of a long story. I mean, the first thing I should say, kind of any of the stories that I tell about the work, the first thing that happens is a kind of attraction. You see something, you connect with it in some way. And actually, when I was back at Rutgers, where I met you, Todd, I had a studio visit with the artist Jim Hodges. And he said, pay attention to your attractions. And so at a certain point where I felt like my work needed to change, what I started doing was just kind of noticing what I was noticing and not judging it or deciding, this is the material that a painting can be made of. This is not the material. So my attraction for Etruscan mirrors began at the Met Museum with an encounter with one of them that's in the Met Study Collection, which is on this kind of like second floor mezzanine above, kind of the beautifully, kind of new classical section with the Greek and Roman sculptures down below.
Nice. Yeah, these are really quite gorgeous. And we have a number of them here, which I'm going to cycle through a little bit as we talk. And it's curious, too, how, I mean, from the standpoint of visual interest, you're painting the back, which is the side of the mirror that has the embellishment. It's got the decoration, or it's got the narrative, however we want to look at it. But from the standpoint of the conceptual, the mirror, as the other side of it, of course, has, its own set of interests. And it's also equally interesting that you decided to flip it around and not show us that. So there's a whole bunch of things going on in this that I really love from all of those angles. But how does that come into play a little bit? I noticed, we've got a lot of figures that are sort of interacting, but we are not interacting with the mirror and the self, which I think kind of creates a conflict.
Well, in fact, I actually started by looking at the reflective side. And then in finding, I went to the Watson Library at the Met to find more images of Etruscan mirrors and started kind of noticing the backsides as I was flipping through the books. And what I became really interested in is these are some of the first mirrors probably ever made. And they started out with images on the back, often of light and water, a reflective surface and light that you need to be able to see by. But then they became really these exercises in looking. So on most of the backs, there are these images of people looking at each other. And it's actually often images of people who are like somewhat immortal, like Achilles or Helen, looking at, you know, their relatives or their friends who are not immortal. So there's often this kind of looking between the living and the dead going on the backs. And that became more and more interesting the more I began researching, reading, kind of looking at these. I also think this one that's up right now, they have a visual connection to the Demoiselles d'Avignon. There's one that particularly seems to kind of draw up that. And I looked and actually there were some on view, a very similar one, in fact, at the Louvre that Picasso may have seen before he made that painting.
That's a great connection. I love that. When, you know, what is it I'm trying to say here? I'm thinking about this notion of realism and the object in the painting. Like this, you know, oftentimes there are tricks that we can utilize in painting to create that sense of realism, whether it's, you know, this notion of illusory space, light and shadow, pictorial space, you know, foreground, middle ground, background. But yours exist as these singular objects in almost a space that's not even there. And they almost exist more like a product photo where we're really just meant to focus on the thing. And I get that. But there's also got to be this challenge for you in terms of realist painting that sort of doesn't allow you access to those things. Maybe I'm not making myself clear, but is this something you deal with?
That's an interesting question. To some extent, I realized years ago that you actually almost could skip a lot of things and people would still fill in the space of representation. Mm-hmm. So I started leaving the cast shadows out of things and really kind of looking at what were the least means necessary to achieve what people thought of as a photorealistic space. And so that was something I sort of experimented with. And I think that comes into play a little bit in these. Right. There's often kind of a physicality to my paint too, which in the case of these mirrors, the ones with the figures on them, that they're literally, I would say, they have a depth because the white lines are actually going deep into the canvas, like they're basically the first layer, and then I painted around them. So it's a kind of reverse engraving process that I did that was far more labor intensive, unfortunately.
Huh. Yeah, I love them. I absolutely love them. There was another thing we had mentioned. What was it you said earlier when you were talking about this is a grouping with the first piece we saw? Mm-hmm. And there was something you were saying about the redaction, I think.
I wasn't focusing so much on that. I was focusing more on the collection as a whole and the title, because it was about the particulars, attending to particulars, and it was more about the relationship of identity to self and stuff like that. Gotcha. So that's kind of what these are. Jen, do you paint from life or do you paint more from photos? Because we're talking about photorealism, and I imagine it's pretty hard to get your hands on an Etruscan mirror. And I know that you do the series with the books and apples and stuff that we're going to get to. But what's your model?
I do a little bit of everything. I paint from life. I print things out, actual size, set up still lives with the flowers that we may get to tonight. But often I'm actually on these paintings using images from books, and I'm just really attending to the physicality of the book. And because I've worked from images for so long, often I'm filling in the kind of gaps that are caused by something being rendered two-dimensional to begin with. So I'm often like, this painting has an amazing amount of paint on it. It's almost dimensional and sculptural.
Oh, wow.
God, I really want to see them in person.
I know, I do too.
Because well, first of all, painting with that kind of thickness to the paint, to me, it just becomes more difficult to sort of realize that kind of, believability, for lack of a better word. The paint starts to become paint rather than the paint representing the thing. So where should we jump to next? I want to kind of, are we looking at these two right here?
We can look at those two. Now, the one is a detail of the other one.
Right.
So this is the piece
This
itself.
is the piece, yeah.
Yes. And this one's number, it's pretty large, 59 by 89 inches, oil on canvas. And this one's fairly recent as well.
Can you talk to us about what's going on in this one and how it relates?
So, I mean, one thing that's in common about the images we've looked at so far is they're black and white. That's not always where I go, but that was this particular series for the most part. I would say, it says it's not exactly black and white. Really, there's, for instance, in the white of this and the black of this, there's probably 15 or 20 colors in each color.
Oh, nice.
So they're very chromatic, and they read very differently in person, and they can fluctuate in different lights. This is an image of Mars that was sent back from one of the Mariner missions, one of the first missions to Mars. And I became interested in kind of this idea of the disconnect that was happening. So this is actually closer to Mars than the photographic rendering, which would have been created from it. And it also has this quality of creating an image. So I believe like 0 would have been no light reflected back. And then I think 255 is the highest light reflected back. So it also creates a kind of reverse image where it's white on this would have been the darkest darks.
Huh. It almost begins to form its own topographical terrain in the ways in which the numbers sort of lay out, rather than what the numbers represent. Like there's an image that's created there without that. You're like,
yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just jump.
I'm seeing some comments. I'm wondering if we should go back to some of the images, but Jamie Foster says the mirrors are exquisite. And John Park says the light on the object here in this last mirror was amazing. So that was one of the...
I think he might be either talking about this one. I think he's talking about this one.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's get back over to this number piece though, because I'm interested in. All right, so when it comes to this notion of the painting becoming meaning and then becoming meaningful, I feel like, there's like also, it's like an image from Mars, which we could have taken, in the most literal sense and painted the image of the surface of Mars. But then let's remove that by one, and let's look at the transmission from Mars and how that sort of breaks down into this number set. And then let's paint that. And I'm wondering how in that process, when you're thinking about what this represents, but what your paint is doing, like how the painting is becoming meaningful in your mind. Like, how does that process sort of unfold for you? I know that it's probably different for each piece, but as the meaning is sort of becoming apparent to you, like what discoveries do you think about, or what comes to mind, or what epiphanies have you had along that way?
I think you're right that it does depend between pictures. This is one that is probably kind of more planned out than others, just because it's like about 8 feet wide, and it was kind of unwieldy. I, was kind of interested in having certain things happen. It has a kind of, as black and white things do, especially when they're like tinged with a kind of chroma, it has a Bridget Riley effect, which also makes it something that you can look at and not look at, which is always sort of interesting to me, like something that has a kind of presence in the real world is always key. So, things like the scale is always a really important aspect that I spend an amazing amount of time figuring out whether something should be like an inch bigger or an inch smaller. I had all these little pieces printed out of this particular one where I just printed out sets of numbers being like, how big do I want the numbers to be? Like, what do they do, in these different dimensions? How do they work on the body? How does this painting work on the body in the size that it is? Does that sort of answer your question, at least on this one, a little bit?
Totally, because that's this is what I was trying to get at without saying it. Because, if I'm thinking about this sort of process of things sort of coming into light as you make them, this one feels like it has to be very planned, right? Because it's in a grid.
It's very precise.
It's those numbers come to you in a very sort of precise sort of layout. And so I wondered how much that could play in on a painting like this. I guess that's what I was asking.
Yeah, and it's actually, I often, attending to particulars, as Terry's kind of brought up, really behind that is an idea of actually paying attention to physical objects in the world. So this particular image was printed in a book at about the time when the Mariner mission happened, and it's not straight. It's not mathematical. It has all these inaccuracies to it. It has all the paper was so bad that the numbers kind of fragment a little bit. And all of those things were important to get in there. So in this case, that sort of planning aspect sort of gets you started, but you have no idea how it's going to look until you actually paint all the numbers. Like, you don't know. Just sort of row by row, I was sort of working down it like an ear of corn, basically. You don't know what you're going to get until it's done.
And I also love the way how when we get in on this detail, the way in which you represented the poorly printed translation of the numbers, in the fact that the typography is not perfect, how that sort of runs counter to the very specific nature that the number is supposed to represent for the light that's reflected back. It's sort of like with binary, with digital, it's either there or it's not there, right? And so with this, it's sort of like, it's supposed to be there or not there, but it's not really there completely. Mm-hmm. So it kind of crosses over into the analog in a really interesting way through what you do with your hand.
Yep, and Susan R. Michael points out that the optical crossing of the diagonals are interesting.
Yeah, I think she's talking about back here,
yeah.
How some of those diagonals are created in there.
That is true. Yeah.
Let's keep going.
So we're getting into a different series right now. These next few paintings are from the language of things. I believe this one that we're looking at right here is probably the only one with a color gradient, whereas the other ones that we're going to see are, again, a little bit more monochromatic. This one's Red Flower. It was 2017, 35 by 44 inches. And I love this one because it's dead center, and it does begin a nice dialogue about what's going on.
But when we go back a little bit further, like what are you thinking about in this series? Like, where are we going?
To some extent, a lot of the series that I've made over the last few years often have sort of works that are kind of at a disjunct from each other, but that add up to something more than the sum of the parts when they're put together. Mm-hmm. So this particular series, I don't know that I kind of have a sort of conceptual oversight on it, mm-hmm. but really, again, sort of allowed it to sort of develop out of the dialogue between the works as they were being made, sort of paying attention to sort of what I was interested in. A lot of them, again, sort of come from printed images and images that are sort of perhaps not that well printed in books where, they're not quite lining up the colors exactly. And adding certain interventions into them was often kind of a practice at that point also.
Gotcha.
So the black lines, it was very beautiful and open. And then I was like, and now I'm going to put these black lines on the side.
Yeah.
So again, a kind of reaction happens.
Well, when I was setting this up, I had to keep looking at this piece like 3 times to see if that was just a cropping issue with the photo or if that was part of the painting. And when I realized it was part of the painting changed dramatically for me because it almost feels like
register lines to me.
to some degree, but then there's also this negation of that space again, right? It's sort of like those black lines kind of flatten the world that this thing lives in. And I mean, I know this is not all about this kind of spatial trickery, but it did sort of make me think about that. And then I went over here and I was looking at this, and this feels much different to me. The rendered quality of this sitting in that darker space. And this called Pot 2018, so coming after the flower. And there were a few other ones after that, like Spoon, etc. Spoon, etc. 1. Which I really love this. I mean, these are pieces that I keep saying this over and over again, but I feel like the grays and the silvers in this are highly chromatic grays and silvers. Like I feel like you work a lot into your color choices.
Yeah, that's really true. And these, I mean, a lot of these were images that I felt were really uncanny on the page and wanted therefore to kind of bring over that quality, the quality of them being more than mere objects.
Yeah, and I think what happens, and I like this notion of this gestalt notion of how, the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of all of the parts, especially when we back up one more and we get into things like Wittgenstein's handles, right? And now this notion of, systems and how paint sort of functions and this object and how it goes together.
Well, relationships are really important within the painting and then within the series itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, when you pair in a series a piece like this, a piece like this, a piece like this, it really starts to sort of, as I start to think about them as a whole, I start to put them together, and that notion of becoming meaningful begins to sort of now really evolve for me. Okay, I'm just going to pop over to a couple more. Now this is Spoon, etc. number 2. And then this one
and this is what I really appreciate about your work. There's a number of pieces that you kind of keep exploring that theme, whereas some of the paintings look identical to each other, but there's like very, very subtle, slight variations. This is one of them. We see that again in some of your other series when we get to, that we're going to get to down the road.
But what were your thoughts on like this painting here and this painting here? 2 different pieces. What were your thoughts on making the revisitation there?
I'm trying to kind of remember exactly why. I think possibly I had a question about scale, and I felt like they're slightly different in not only in the way they're cropped, but also in the sense of scale. And I felt like they were doing very, very different things. I also had a kind of an idea to actually sort of black out the left side of the slightly wider one. Mm-hmm. But then for some reason, it was already doing that. Like there was something about just having that extra space there that was working in a kind of sort of phenomenal kind of way.
Can I just do a thing real quick while we're talking? Because I kind of want to take this. I kind of want to go here. And I kind of, I want to do something for a second because I feel like this is necessary at this point. But here they are. Wait a minute, they're not perfectly centered here so we can see them. That's a little bit better. Actually, it's not better at all. Hold on, because we really need to see the edges of these canvases. And because I believe that the squarish one and the rectangular one are in fact doing something quite different. And that's a really interesting thing to think about in terms of this relationship. I am never going to get this. This is why I prepare everything beforehand, people. Because I am just terrible at this. Hold on a minute. Almost there. There we go. Now we can see both of them the rectangular form and the squarish form. There's a slight color issue, or was that in the photography?
They are, I mean, each one of them is kind of different. I never try to match paintings, even when I'm doing multiples of the same thing. I'm
Sure.
always going back to the original. So I actually think color-wise, they are subtly different.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's necessarily. I wouldn't suggest that that's what you were up to in these. I really love the fact that earlier you said when you were talking about the planning and the numbers painting, how you will spend a lot of time considering a few inches in scale on something that might be that large. And then I see this, and all of a sudden now I'm really starting to tap into how you think about the way in which the space you're working in contributes to the overall piece, and that it's worth going back to revisit a piece like this just to see how those subtle changes completely change the read. 63 says, these are beautiful, sort of Lee Lozano, but with cutlery. I like that. Okay, so that was just, I'm sorry, I had to indulge myself on that one. But let's keep running along here. This is called Song 2018. This is a very different piece now all of a sudden. Where does this fall in the whole trajectory? Is this a little later now?
It's similar, actually. I think not too distant from those other ones, but it was kind of made out of different materials. It was actually probably the transitional piece before I began the spoons and the flower. There was a moment, and we'll kind of maybe get to that, where I always painted the image within its vehicle. So if it was on a page, if it was in a book, I painted the book. I painted the page, I painted the cutout. And this represents a moment where I actually began to bring the frame out and kind of, if you work with images, it's kind of like suddenly I'm owning the image in terms of being like, it's not an object that I found, it's actually the painting that I'm making. But what's a little hard to tell in the slide here is that there is a kind of a change in the thickness of paint where the page is. So there's this kind of halo of the page.
Yes, I can see
That
it.
sort of,
I can see it. And I was dying.
and it's actually, yeah.
Go ahead, you first. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say it was a leftover page from something else I was doing. So it's actually cut. It has one figure cut out of it, and then it's torn out of a book also.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because I was dying to jump over to one of your book paintings because I noticed how in some of the paintings of the books, where there's space between the text, you can see through that page to a page behind it and actually see the ghosted text coming through the page, which is just like, it's mind-blowing to me on so many different levels, conceptually especially, and then I'm looking at a painting, but I'm seeing through a painting to the words underneath the painting, which I just love. But
and we see this same theme, like this is from the one series, but we see this again in your series called Mall Girls, which I might be mispronouncing. I thought that was a unique play on words too, because I'm thinking mal means bad, bad in Spanish. And I know you're into Spanish literature, so it's almost like bad girls, objecty, or and I was even thinking mall girls. So it was an interesting play on words for me. But we see you revisit this theme in this one as well. And then there's a couple variations here. There's that one there. And then there's another one down here, I believe.
Sorry, I'm totally messing with you.
It's okay. There's that one, and then there's this one. And then this one's more of a... Let me just pull that one up for a second. I didn't write the notes on that one. It's just another one of the items for that.
Yeah, there's a bunch here like that. And I want, can we jump over to the books for a second? Because I want to make
yes.
Because I want to make the relationship.
One of my favorite series.
I love this series, and I wanted to talk about, should I start here?
That's the one with the translucency.
Yeah. So this one, this piece is what I was talking about before. So in this painting of this book, we can see through that page, and you can see that subtle text. Can we just talk about the books for a second and what books you chose? If just not all of them, obviously, but for a couple of examples of why you were choosing what you were choosing and what drove you.
The idea for the book paintings actually came when I went to a talk on Francis Bacon at the Met Museum, and there was a British presenter, and he had like he was really old school, and he'd obviously taken these pictures, and he was trying to take pictures of images, but he just took pictures of the whole book. So suddenly, like every time he was like trying to show that's so and so's photo, the whole book would appear, and he'd then point up to the corner and be like, look at the photo in the corner. But there was something really interesting about kind of seeing the book sort of flipped up in this way. And I began to sort of choose particular texts because I'm a big reader. Like I enjoy reading a variety of things, especially kind of European novels. And I began to sort of choose particular texts that were of interest to me, and work with them in different ways. And started with the inside of the book, and then also did some covers later on.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And they really get to be like I love this as
Yeah,
well.
this is such a gorgeous series. This series is called The Words. This is a little bit older. This was back about 10 years ago or so, 2012. They're smaller. They're 10 by 12 inches oil on canvas.
I'm gonna do some more. Hold on.
Yeah, these are just stunning.
I mean, this is just insanely gorgeous. I love this. I'm just gonna pop through a few of these really quickly.
And all of these are actual size. That was kind of really important to the way I was kind of attending to my materials at that time. And I was very interested because a lot of these, especially these book covers that you're showing now, are basically at the same time as the AbX movement. So I just felt like there was this kind of interesting overlap between them, and that each of the book paintings started as actually as a kind of abstraction, as a rectangle within a rectangle. And they stayed that way for a long time. And there would always be this moment where I'd be like, am I going to paint the book, or am I going to leave it as this kind of luminous rectangle? And then, so even the act of painting the cover was a kind of redaction of the kind of purity of the abstraction that had existed before.
Ah, nice, nice. Yeah, I can totally see that. The canvases here also feel like they might be a little bit thicker to me, or is it just the angle of the lighting? Like that feels like a really chunky canvas. Is it, or is the cradle on that canvas fairly standard?
Good question. I think some of these are larger. I used to kind of make my own so that they were a little bit deeper, and worked with, sometimes with things that I think more like an inch and a half.
Yeah.
And then I sort of slowly began to kind of get rid of those thicker ones in favor of much thinner images. Because I always wanted the painting to be an object, but I began to sort of negotiate other ways of focusing on the objectness.
Right.
Right, that would seem to make sense too, because we expect a book to be somewhat thicker. So if it was on a frame that wasn't as thick, it would feel like unnatural. So it's almost like we're expecting it to be on a thicker cradle.
Right, but then I think what winds up happening with that is the physical canvas painting itself becomes more of the object than the painting as picture becomes object, which is kind of an interesting place to sort of try and balance this whole thing, right? It's like, because of course there's a direct connection there, but then it's like, well, wait a minute, now I'm sort of negating the painting, meaning the picture, as it's like this weird in between space that I kind of love that.
Yeah, there's definitely a sensuality with this particular series too, because there's like, you almost feel like you can feel the pages and smell that old book smell and all of those things. I love this series so much. This was my favorite series of all of yours. I mean, I like all of your work, but this one really spoke to me.
And Memory Vessel's in here saying that she loves the tattered corners. And some of the
I love that. I love that. And then there's one piece in here in particular. I'm just going to pull this up because I can smell the book. You know what I mean? So there's just so much going on with these pieces.
Yeah.
I just love it.
And this okay, so let's just talk conceptually again. Like there's the painting of the painting in the book. It's a painting of a book with a painting in it. And I love this play on this sort of the way in which the thing is repeated in the thing. But there's a couple like this actually. Like,
Yeah.
look
Oh
at
my
this.
God, that's so stunning.
fantastic.
So stunning.
We're just gonna sit here and ooh and ah at your work,
Yeah.
Jen. You just hang out and listen to us be like, oh wow, and we love this one.
Yes.
And we love this. Okay, so let's hold on. Let's jump back up for a minute because there's a whole series here.
There's a couple series.
We're getting.
that
We have 5 minutes
We only
left.
have 5 minutes. Let's scroll down a little bit.
More.
Well, there was that series. I love how you divided these up into series too, because it really does make you think of the works in, in the context of what they're paired with.
I do have the gold leaf on canvas ones with the apples.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So
I knew
this
that.
this series is called Open Letter. This is another one of my favorites. I love this. This is part of the series where we see it's almost like alliteration. We keep seeing this play on a theme. We see the apples multiple times, and I particularly love this one because I feel like the one apple is trying to be like the other apple. You're using precious materials in it, like gold leaf. And it's like a cancel culture, but then again, it's trying to be like something. So there's like this interesting thought process going on. But we do see some of the other ones too that it's paired with if you want to pull those up.
Well, tell us about these, Jen. Like where are we going with these?
They're kind of coming out of having made a certain number of books, and to some extent, often when you're a representational painter, people take that very literally. So they're like, oh, you're painting books, you're a book painter. So what I wanted on some level, I started out going, I don't want people to say I'm an apple painter. So I'm going to do something to let them know it's not about the apples. It's about something else. So I had this kind of plan to do also, I mean, I want to say it's kind of a sort of Protestant ethic. Like I often like to redact things that are particularly lovely. But I'm not Protestant, I'm Catholic, so I don't know what that is. I'm like, I want to deny a little bit of pleasure. So the gold leaf is actually like a scribble that I sort of blew up and then actually did the gilding on. So the idea of this really unimportant, really loose mark being made gold, covering up this probably beautifully painted apple that people pretended they didn't want. They didn't kind of want to look at this painting. It just was a kind of way of saying it's not about the apples, that there's something else going on. It's not a pure representation of the world. It's not formal exactly.
Right.
It's trying to get you to look at how you look at the world.
Right. And inside of that same series, we also have these.
Yep, this one's untitled, and this is all part of the Open Letter series. And you kind of
I'm just going to start moving through them quickly.
yeah, there's just a juxtaposition with some design elements, which almost takes away from some of the more classical elements in there, because we see a harken back to this Greek statues and whatnot with a more modern context surrounding it. I can't quite tell if it's like distraction or embellishment
or if it's trying to say it's not about the flowers,
right?
It's kind of another sort of layer that's there. But Jen, can you help me out here?
So probably what might help is to say that the patterns are actually security patterns from the inside of envelopes. And when you blow these up, they're not digitally printed. I think they're offset or something. So they blow up without pixelation, and they still function to disrupt the gaze in the way that you would expect a security pattern to block your ability to see into an envelope.
Huh.
Wow.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Dazzle ships, that interesting camouflage that was applied to ships that was invisible to various types of radar. Even though it was loud and patterned and very, very visible, it was invisible to other forms of viewing. And it had a very interesting sort of pattern work to it. So I like the way that sort of lives then, because it to me now, rather than this functioning like a full field of space, it's almost like now things are starting to optically sort of shift and change. It's not stopping me from seeing what I'm supposed to see, but it's maybe hampering me from seeing it in the way I might want to see it, which is similar to the redaction that we saw in the beginning.
Yeah, and the small figures that you were looking at, if you remember that one we looked at with the singing figure and then the empty space on the side, that was a leftover piece from having cut all of these little sculptures out of books. And then kind of I stood them up so that they could kind of have a life as objects. And it was amazing how dimensional they became, even though they were certainly flat with a little piece of balsa wood on the back to make them stand. So I have all these, kind of classical and earlier sculptures, like action figures basically sitting around the studio now.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Jen, how many paintings do you work on at a time? Are you someone who needs to complete one, or do you have multiples going at the same time?
Good question. Often my process at this point takes a little bit of development. So I always have something kind of coming up, like I'm preparing it, I'm doing a little bit of work on it while I'm trying to finish other things. So when things are going well, I have multiple things going on.
Gotcha. Well, Jen, I'm going to just go through some comments real quick because we're going to let you go. We don't want to dominate your time, but let's see real quick. Sculpture Paper Doll Memory Vessel saying here, Jess Park says, these all draw you in so deeply, amazing to me. Ben Hagenbush says, because Jen has a variety of subjects, you can't wait to see the next painting. There's some good stuff in here, but I missed a few things. I just want, John Park says he definitely wants to see the book paintings in person.
Yes.
Pumpkin Audrey's loving on the apples. Now it's starting to file in here. Susan Sparks Michael says, thank you so much for the quick run through of Jen Mazza's work. Fascinating. Yeah, Jen, I got to say this. I feel like sometimes in these shows, when we have 45 minutes to talk to somebody, I always say to Terri, I'm like, gosh, we should really narrow this into like one section of the work and just focus on this one body. But I wanted so badly to get an overview and kind of get further in. Well, listen, if you have anything coming up in the future, show-wise, let us know, because we'd love to put it out to our people. I know they'd love to come and see your work in person. And it was great to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to re-encounter a lot of these works I haven't had out or are living with other people at this point too. So thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we hope to talk to you very soon. And if you want to hang out, awesome. If not, we'll talk to you very shortly. All right, Jen, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay. Artyarts.org is still up on the screen. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I
She has a ton of work. You have to go to her website, which is jenmazza.com, to review it all.
Oh yeah, let me put those up on the screen for you because I do have them.
Touched the tip of the iceberg, so there's a ton of stuff there, and it's so gorgeous.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It is jenmazza.com. I unfortunately don't have the third on this part of the screen. It's on the earlier screen. But definitely go and check the work out. You can really dig in deep.
Yep.
And
you can also go to her Instagram, which is Jen_Mazza, and there she has a link tree where you can see all of her sites and get directly to her website.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this was awesome. We really enjoyed having Jen on the show tonight. You guys, next week, Andrew Cornell Robinson.
Why, yes.
Yeah, we got Andrew Cornell Robinson coming up next week, which I'm really excited about. So definitely tune in for that. I am out of
Hot toddy.
I've got a little hot toddy left with which to toast everybody. No, don't. No. Anyway, everyone, thanks very much for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure having you. We will talk to you next week. If you're new to the channel, please leave a follow before you go. We would love that, and you'll get to see a host of great artists that we've got lined up all the way out into fall. Anyway, everybody, have a great night.
Yes.
We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.